Okay, are you ready?
I am.
All right. I want to hit on the investigation first.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decibel here on KLRU. And we are so happy to have with us today Interim Police Chief Brian Manley.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on and answering some questions from our community and just talking about the investigation that has been going on since the Austin bombings here. I want to start with, first of all, the interview, I want us to kind of look back at the lessons that we've learned and then look forward to what we can do in the community. But I do want to hit on the investigation first. What can you tell us? Anything new that has happened over the last, day or two first?
So the investigation is still ongoing, as you can imagine, with how complex this was, with how many tips came in, how many leads we followed up on. There's a lot of information that came in. We were fortunate to have our federal partners here with us that really helped us work through all those tips. And what they did is they left behind all the work that they did, and we're going to continue to work through and ensure that any lead that has not yet been addressed is addressed. And then the bomber's house in Pflugerville, where there was a search warrant executed there by both the ATF and the FBI, and there was a lot of evidence gathered from that as well. So our investigators here locally will continue to pour through the evidence just to make sure we're not missing anything. There's nothing else we need to look into. So although the very large federal presence that had been here during the active portion of this investigation has left, there's a team here, the local ATF and FBI agents that are always here in Austin, along with the Austin investigators that will continue to follow up. As far as things that people are really wanting to understand, such as a motive and a reason, we just don't have one right now, but we are not done investigating this, and we're still going through the evidence because we too want to know why.
There's been a call for you to release that confession tape. Why have you decided not to do that?
First of all, there's still an ongoing investigation, so we don't want to release it for that reason. Much of what's on the tape has been released to the media already through various different sources. I also will have to look at, when we get to that point, is that something we really want to release to the public, have put up on the internet and YouTube and out there to live for eternity, so that other people that may be inspired by what this bomber did, or other people that want to idolize what this person did, I just don't want to give them that opportunity. So that's something that I'll have to weigh very heavily in the decision. I absolutely understand the community's interest in what's on the tape and the wanting of that information to be public, but to have his voice live on the internet, having heard that tape, knowing what's on it, I would just have to take some serious consideration.
2 words: domestic terrorist. Now, you came out yesterday and decided that you felt more comfortable calling the bomber a domestic terrorist.
Yes.
Why now?
So during the investigation, if you can imagine the pressure of dealing with what was happening in our city, and really putting all of your effort towards identifying the suspect or suspects and putting a stop to the violence. We were working with our federal partners along with our district attorney and our U.S. attorney, because we didn't know, had we taken the suspect alive, where we would end up in court. Would we end up in district court, state, or would we end up in federal court? There are very specific definitions for terrorism-related offenses in the federal statutes that you would have to meet to prosecute someone for a terrorism charge. So during the investigation, I maintained my focus on putting a stop to the violence, working with our team to identify the suspect and put a stop to it. Now that we have, and I've had a week plus now to really reflect and to really hear from the community and to understand the true impact that it had. Not that we weren't aware during the investigation, we just maintained our drive and our focus on solving it. Now that I have really understood the impact and taken that to heart and heard the stories and sensed it, I believe that what this bomber did to our community was terroristic, and therefore he is a domestic terrorist. Now, that's not a charge that can be filed. It's not something that you would add charges to. Had we taken him into custody and he was facing charges, he likely would have been under capital murder charges here in Travis County. So this, though, when you look at the various different definitions of terrorism and what's out there, domestic terrorism, it's defined in many places, including the Patriot Act, and part of it talks about the impact it has on a populace, and he definitely created terror on our populace. And so, having taken time now, stepped away from the active part of the investigation and really taken to heart the impact this had on our community, that's why I've changed.
You mentioned you heard stories. I mean, I'm trying to figure out more about what got you to this point, because I understand what you were saying of you were concerned about the legal definition of it and working with prosecutors and thinking about what would happen when this, if this person was prosecuted. Did you hear certain stories from people? Can you give us examples? Did you talk to certain people that just really moved you to have a feeling to call this domestic terrorist?
Well, I reached out to the victims' families, to Anthony House's family. I had the opportunity to speak to his stepfather and his mother. I reached out to Draylon Mason's family. Initially spoke to an aunt because his mom was still recovering, and I attended his memorial service last Tuesday night, and really got to learn a lot about what a wonderful young man he was and what a void has been left since he's no longer with us. To see his friends talk about him and eulogize him the way that he did, and just to really get a grasp of who he was. And then I also had a chance to reach out and speak with the Herrera family. On top of that, just hearing from average Austinites, just on how did it impact them. It didn't have a personal touch in that they didn't suffer an immediate victimization, but it put this city on edge. It put, when we had that, the change where it went from packages being left on porches to where we were so strong on putting a message out of don't handle those, to then the bomber increased their skill and used a tripwire device. We really realized that this was something bigger than maybe, or not bigger, but more skilled, and hearing stories of how that changed people's lives. They didn't want to let their kids go out front anymore. They were afraid about their kids playing in the in the yard or in the park. It just became evident once I had time to sit back and absorb all of that. I didn't take the time during the investigation. We were spending sleepless nights just trying to put a stop to the violence. But once I took the time to really understand and take in that impact, that's why I changed my statement.
The wording, really. What would you do it differently if you had to do it again?
It didn't change anything that we did. I think that in the public there was a big discussion about, was it terrorism, was it not terrorism? And what I would always do, and what I would, I think that reasonable and responsible leadership and law enforcement teams would do, is maintain the integrity of that case in case you end up in a court at some point. So if you start throwing out terms that have absolute legal definitions and you end up in a courtroom and you can't meet that definition, I did not want to do anything to jeopardize the case. So would there be things we would do differently? Sure, we learn lessons in these big cases like this. The amount of work, the amount of support, everything that took place, we had, we brought this to a resolution rather quickly, not without tremendous harm to our community, but we brought it to a resolution rather quickly. But there's always things you can do different or better.
Let's talk about the community reaction. You mentioned that. There has been a great amount of positive reaction toward your leadership through all of this. And I know tonight you're heading over to the Irwin Center to be honored by some 14,000 people at a citywide Good Friday service, along with some other members of your team. How are you handling all of that attention and that praise?
Well, I will say this, it's one of the more uncomfortable things that I do, just because I represent a team. I was maybe the face of this to our community as our police chief, and was the one keeping the community informed, but I was one person. I was part of a team. I had a special agent in charge from the FBI, Christopher Combs, and I had the FBI special agent in charge, Fred Malinowski, from the ATF, and we had the U.S. Postal Service. We had Texas DPS. There were so many people that played an important role. And I think what I always try to highlight is that this was not one person, this was not even one department. Everybody agreed that the initials were left at the door, whether it said APD, ATF, FBI, all those initials were left at the door, and rank was left at the door as well, because there was too much violence going on in the community. So I understand that people want to recognize what we did, and I very much appreciate that. And I would encourage people that want to do that, when you see a police officer out at lunch or out in the street, just say thank you. That really does mean something to the officers. It really does. And to our federal partners as well, our DPS partners, just say thank you. I am very appreciative of the accolades that are coming to the team that put this together, but I would just highlight the fact that it was a team.
Community reaction also included some negative reaction. Really, the bombings have in some ways highlighted the racial divide that exists in this city. And I wonder how you think after the bombings now, how do we heal that? Or how do we bridge that divide? What are the first steps that you take in doing that?
You know, I was actually at an event at the Grant AME Church last night, and that's exactly what it was, about hope and healing. It was bringing in the community to talk about how do we go forward. And you know, you want to come away from a tragedy like this with such loss of life somehow better. You want to learn something from it. There has to be a positive that comes from this. And one of the things that I would like to see is that everyone continues to pull together, because although this threat is over as we know it right now, and we've not any reason to believe that there's a continuing threat, we're a major metropolitan area. We're the 11th largest city in the country, and there will be other threats that will come towards our community. And lessons learned from this is the importance of knowing your neighbors. That way you know what looks out of place. You know who may look out of place, and therefore you know what's suspicious. So I think we've got to pull together in that area, but also the police and the community as well. We strive to be engaged with the community. We make ourselves available as much as possible, and I just want the community to know that we want to engage with you. We want to be a part of these discussions. We want to attend your neighborhood meetings, and so I'm hoping out of all of this, some of the lessons learned are the importance of continuing to work together, because I have a department that's authorized 1,908 police officers to serve a city of almost 1 million people. So we can be so many places at one time, but the community, the eyes and ears of this community and the partnership of this community is really what's going to allow us to maximize our safety.
The conversations can be uncomfortable when we're dealing with the racial divide. And I was going to ask, what are some specific things that we first do? You mentioned your officers getting out there and speaking with people in the communities.
Sure, and again, I think it's just addressing the concerns in the community. And this is nothing new for the APD. We are regularly engaging in these conversations, and as much as I say praise an officer when you see them doing something right or just for doing what we do, you got to let us know when we come up short as well. The only way we can make change, the only way we can fix things is if the community lets us know when we come up short. So I would encourage folks, you know, utilize the ability to call in and make commendations for officers that have done good things, but let us know when we've come up short as well.
We have some viewers. We asked for questions on Facebook, and I wanted to ask Christina Brown, who you may know. She is with Counterbalance ATX. She was here earlier this week telling us some stories of how the Black and brown community felt through all of this, in particular in the beginning when these bombings happened. And her question, she feels that you showed the gap between communities of color and other communities when you explain you just now are understanding impacts of the bomber. And then she asks, is this indicative of Austin leadership? I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
And again, I think what I'm highlighting is I slept very little during those days on end, and I was exerting all of my energy towards the investigation, the identification of suspects, and the attempts to bring them into our custody. It's not that I was not aware that we had suffered serious casualties in our community and loss of life, both injuries and loss of life. I just focused on putting a stop to the violence. And now that as I said, I've been a week separated now, I've had time to just engage with the community and have conversations in the aftermath of what happened here, attend the memorial service, a few of them now, that I have allowed myself the time to do those things, whereas during the investigation, I was focused on just trying to put a stop to it.
One other question, just specifically ask what message you have to people of color in this community.
Well, I want you to feel like the Austin Police Department is the same police department for you as it is for the rest of the city. We are here to serve this entire community and to provide the same level of service to our entire community. We strive to be reflective of our community in both our hiring, our diversity, and so I would encourage folks, engage with us, talk with us. apply to join us. It's the best place to affect changes from within. And so if you have the heart to serve, then please come join us. But I would go back. I know there had been criticism that on March 2nd, the very first bomb that took the life of Mr. Anthony House, that we didn't handle that one as seriously as we would have if we knew it was part of a larger scheme. And I actually would take exception to that, because if you go back and you look at that day, if you go back and you pull up the media and look at what was out there, we called in the ATF, we called in the FBI, we called in the Postal Service, and when I did the press conference that day, the FBI and the ATF were standing there with me. They were a part of the investigation. And our statement that day, my statement was, based on what we know right now, we have no reason to believe this is part of a larger scheme, or we have no reason to believe it's nothing other than an isolated incident. However, we're not making assumptions, and that's why our federal partners are here. We actually had the ATF process that scene. The ATF collected the evidence. They sent that to Quantico. We did not try and handle this as just a local incident that had occurred. So although we had no way of knowing it would ultimately be part of the larger scheme that it was, what we did on that day was exactly the same as what we did on the other bombing scenes as far as bringing in all of our federal partners.
But Mr. House was actually called at some point a possible suspect in this?
So 3 days later, on the day of the incident, I identified this as a homicide, and that's how we were investigating it. A member of my team 3 days later did a press conference just to give some updates on safety tips around packages and how to be aware and look for suspicious packages. And when he was asked a question by a reporter of why had it been changed to a suspicious death from a homicide, he did in fact answer that it was because they could not rule out that the victim had not created the bomb himself and it exploded. And I have apologized for that comment. I will continue to apologize for that comment. That is not a comment we should have made, even if it was an avenue we were thinking we needed to look into. My comment to my team the next day was, did we really just tell an 8-year-old girl over the news that we think her father may have been the bomber and he blew himself up? Because I have a problem with that. We will be better for having gone through that. It should not have happened, but it is a learning lesson for us. And when I mentioned earlier, lessons learned, things we would do differently, that one is huge.
That one. Any others that come to your mind, or you personally? Is there a lesson that you have learned through this?
So there was another point where I made a comment at the very last press conference, and again, this was days into a very rugged investigation, a very tiresome investigation, and when I gave a description of the bomber at a press conference, and I used a word that people felt like I was trying to show him sympathy or lessen what he had done. And I understand why people feel that way, but there is no way I would have shown sympathy or minimized the conduct of someone who had murdered 2 in our community, seriously injured others, and in my opinion, attempted to kill my police officers when they were taking him in custody by waiting until they got right up on his truck before he detonated that bomb. That is not someone that I was going to minimize their conduct nor defend, but I was trying to describe what I had heard on an audio tape, and I used a word that I think was concerning for others. So I would be more cautious, more intentional in selecting specific descriptive words.
The City Council, some members of City Council have already called for your promotion to full-time chief. Not that you weren't full-time, I didn't mean that, not interim, okay. And then there are others in the community that don't want to rush it. I think we ought to go through the process, that we need to have some conversations about what you would bring to this, and what are your thoughts on that? Do you see a value in the process? Would you take the job tomorrow if they offered it to you?
I think I've been pretty clear, even since the early months when I took over. Austin's my home. I've been with the Austin Police Department for 28 years. I serve with men and women I consider my family in a community that is my own. Most people have to leave their agency and go be a police chief in someone else's community. So to be the police chief in my community, I would absolutely want to stay on and do this job if the new city manager thinks that I am the right fit and that I bring to the table what he wants for this city. So that's a decision that he will make when the time is right, and I stand ready to serve if that is his choice.
What about the culture of the Austin Police Department? I know you've been interim chief for some time now, but would you, if you were given the name Chief Manley here, would you change the culture in any way, and especially after the bombings, in light of some of the discussions and the divisions in our community?
Mm-hmm. I think we've already changed the culture some in the past 16 months in how we're approaching community policing. We're really trying to get further down into individual neighborhoods and really look at problems specific at a neighborhood level instead of the wider sector or city level, and I think that's important. We've worked really hard to engage with the community at a greater level. We've hosted facilitated meetings in every single sector of the city, really trying to reach the people that we don't always reach through our commander forums or other settings, because when you call people to come to you for a meeting, you get people that have the ability, the time, the mobility to do so. So what we're trying to do is integrate into meetings that may already be taking place and just really find our way through there. As far as the culture, we have been a community policing agency. We are working to do more in that area, and we're really focusing now on bringing in evidence-based practices. So I think that the police department, we are willing to hold ourselves accountable when we come up short, and we are willing to learn from our mistakes, and I think that's you know, that's where my role is making sure that we're meeting the expectations of this community. And that's what I want to hear from the community is when we come up short, when we miss, when we're not meeting their expectations, let us know so that we can make change where possible.
Let's look forward with Austinites. What can Austinites learn from this? You mentioned getting to know your neighbor earlier, and that's a big lesson I think that did come out of this. But anything else that we can learn, and anything else that we can do for you, for Austin Police?
I think it's being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your neighborhood. Again, we talked earlier about who, you know, what belongs, what's suspicious, what's not. Be aware of the times in which we live. We face different threats now based on all of the technological advancements, whether it be, you know, the identity thefts or the elderly that fall victim to all of these scams that really impact the community. Just be aware. And we live also in a time where everybody holds in their hand their cell phone, their smartphone, heads are down, and we're typing, we're texting. I'm just as guilty of it as everybody else, and we lose our perception of what's going on. And I would just encourage people, be aware of your surroundings. It's the old mantra, we say it all the time, see something, say something. Right. Let us know when things look out of place. But I would also encourage, be engaged, partner with us, force us to listen to you if we're not easily listening already, which shouldn't be the case, but let your voices be heard so that we can make sure we are representing and responding to all of Austin in the manner in which they choose.
Do we have any questions, guys? Want to ask for that real quick, just to make sure if anybody's sending in. They'll look into that. Personally, what was it like to be in the middle of this? I mean, you've been on the force. I mean, you've been with Austin PD for quite some time, but what was it like to be in the middle of all of the, well, you had many layers of teams from the federal level and state, and what was it like to be in the middle of all of that?
You know, again, I could think of so many adjectives, but initially, I mean, it was just surreal. It's because this is our city. Not only does this not happen in our country, but it doesn't happen in our city the way that it happened. I mean, you'll get an explosion, you'll get a device, but the pattern that we started seeing, the repeated pattern, and then the search to get him, to be in that moment, but it was rewarding in that we had a level of partnership here that really worked well together. And that's not always the case, especially if you pay attention to, you know, various news broadcasts or movies or media that, you know, there's this rub, there's this competition. Everybody left that at the door. And so there was also, though, an overwhelming sense of responsibility because this is my city. And I really felt the weight of that on my shoulders, even though I had partners from the federal agencies here and we were all working it together. This is my city and my department, and I took that very personal.
I would venture to guess that weight was heavier than it's ever been.
Yes, those were the most difficult and the longest weeks of my career.
Did you sleep?
Very little.
Yeah.
There was one night after I guess it would have been the fourth incident. I I laid on my floor in my office for about an hour and then got back up and went straight back to the scene. The same with the earlier incidents. You know, you'd go home and you'd get an hour or 2 or 3 of sleep and then you come right back in because you didn't want to not be a part of trying to solve this, the importance of it, the need to do it as quickly as possible. And that's not just me, that was the entire team. There was a level of commitment that Austin should be proud of, and we should be thankful to our federal partners for all of the assistance that they gave us along with DPS.
Is there anything else that you want to leave the community with? Because there'll be more fallout from this as we go forward, and I know you mentioned you're working on some of those divisions in the community, but is there anything else you want to leave the community with today, a message to anyone that we haven't touched upon?
No, I think we've talked about a lot of it, so maybe what I do is I highlight the importance of we have to be better out of this. We can't just be okay that we put a stop to it. We've got to find a way to be better, and I think that comes through, you know, getting to know each other, cooperating better with each other, working within our neighborhoods, building the stronger relationships between the community and the police department, recognizing when we come up short, and really, I think that really what it boils down to is we're going to be safer together, so we need to work together.
Thank you. Interim Chief Manley with us today, and we appreciate the time. Good luck over at the Irwin Center tonight.
All right.
Thanks for watching, everyone.